so many other systems are telling these kids no, we get to tell them yes. And one of them walks in every day. A new one will walk in every day. You don't know their story until they tell it to you. And it's an honor for them to trust you with it.
Welcome to She Leads. I'm your host, Thea, and I'm so glad you joined in today. This is a podcast about leadership, faith, and relationships. And I'm so excited to have my very dear friend, Czichos, be with us today. She is a fellow pastor that we will actually be ordained together in just a few weeks, which is super exciting. She is have just brought a lot of light to my life, and I've loved walking with her in this season. So I'm really thrilled to have you on. Jordan, welcome. Thank you for coming all the way out to Pearland for this.
Of course.
And why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit? What should we know about your leadership right now?
Yeah, my name is Czichos. I am an elder in the UMC. I work closely with Thea in a lot of ways, and I'm very excited to be here. I currently serve in two places, a nonprofit called Houston Revision, where its mission is to create community and kinship amongst the most disenfranchised children, teens, and young adults. Usually these children, teens, and young adults are either homeless, interact with the juvenile justice system some way, or are refugees and immigrants, and sometimes a combination of all or some. And so that's part of my job. I run the drop-in center there as their director. And then on the other half of my job, I am the youth pastor for St. Luke's Gethsemane campus.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about Revision. What is your leadership role there, and what leadership skills are you using, daily in that atmosphere?
I think the leadership skills that I'm using daily are adaptability and a willingness to be humble daily. So I am the drop-in center director, meaning that any child who comes through the bright blue door of Revision, I have to interact with. Whether they need hygiene products, or they need clothes, or they need food, or they need tutoring help, or they want to get connected to the soccer program or the breaking program, which is break dancing for those of you who don't know what breaking is. And I try and connect them. I try and connect the dots for who this child is, how they've walked into Revision, and how can they become a part of the fold of our community. And so some days it looks like running around and taking kids to libraries, getting them their licenses. And some days it looks like helping out with math homework or teaching kids how to shoot pool, something I never thought I would do in the landscape of ministry, but I get to do every single day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So is this what you always dreamed and knew you wanted to do?
No. How
did you get here?
So how I got to Revision was I got a phone call from Reverend Carrie Leader, who is the Chief Operating Officer of Revision. And she said, we know you've worked with people who have experienced being unsheltered before, and we know you like kids. And so we want you to come work for us. To which my first response was, I always said I would never go back into youth ministry, even though youth ministry was part of what started my calling as an elder in the UMC. It was serving at a church, working long hours as a youth director and a choir director and as a pastor for shut-ins. And that summer, I was 19 going on 20, and it is the reason I am here today. And now I get to relive that again and work with those same kinds of children and teens every day. And so I never thought I'd be here. I always thought I'd be like an associate pastor till I became a senior pastor, but I think God is working in a miraculous way that I never thought could happen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the joys that come from working with youth and leading youth, especially in this unique capacity where students are coming in and out of or are currently dealing with a lot of trauma? A lot of chaos in their lives. So what are the joys? What's the beauty of that opportunity?
The thing that brings me the most joy, and I get choked up every time, is that when they come into Revision, they aren't their trauma. Sure, they carry it, but they're not their labels. They're not the poor Muslim. They're not the Christian who came from the Congo who only speaks Swahili. They're not just the kids at school who fight. They are not homeless. They're not unsheltered. They're not unstably housed. They are just revision kids. And they get to be teenagers. And most people become annoyed at the noise and rumbles of teenagers. And they become annoyed with the complaints about wanting food or whatever they need and things like that. And that brings me joy because that means they're just acting like a kid. They get to be kids in revision. They get to be loud and run around and what I call holy chaos, which happens from 3:45 p.m. to about 9 p.m. every single day in revision. And when it's quiet at around 4:30, we all the staff look at each other and we're like, is everyone okay? What's going on? Because we know that means something's wrong in the community if there are not kids coming here. And it provides a place for children just to be children. And even when we work with 18 to 24-year-olds as well, it provides a place for them to be 18 to 24 and experience the youthfulness of life and not the burdens that they've had to carry at such an early age.
So let's talk about some of those struggles, not necessarily about what the kids are facing, but what are the struggles you find in leading in this very unique circumstances and arena?
I think the biggest struggle is that most people don't know about teens and kids like this. They don't know that there are 5,000 to 6,000 teens per year in the city of Houston being forced out of their homes and couch surfing. And the state of Texas does not declare someone homeless until they are 23. And so between the ages of 15 to 23, oftentimes we see kids who are couch surfing, kids who are getting out of prison, and they don't acknowledge these kids. And then that's who becomes chronically homeless. That's who you see under the bridge. And we're just ignoring these children, but that's because no one knows about it. And then no one knows about we interact with so many different kinds of kids, right? So that's the homeless population. And then no one knows about the school to prison pipeline that we work with, where we go and see kids at Ellis every first Friday of the month. And most of them were victims of a school where they were put into punishment by like 5th grade. And we know statistically that if you are sent to ISS or some sort of suspension, by the time you're in 6th grade, you're 40% to 60% more likely to end up in prison by the time you're 18. And the more suspensions you get, the more likely you are to end up in prison. And what does it say to be the workers to divert that work? And because we have to be the diversion piece, we have to talk about it. Yeah. We have to talk about what diversion looks like. And no one wants to have the uncomfortable conversations because they're hard and they suck. And you're working within systems that are built against so many kids, even though the systems won't acknowledge it. Yeah. And legislature won't acknowledge it. So you have to be the people, you have to be the church to say, well, I can't make legislation, but I can go talk to that kid. I can be a mentor. And that's the challenge, is getting people to understand that we can't fix the system. We have to acknowledge the system might be problematic, and we can't fix the children. We can't pull the nail out of their head, even when we know they're making dumb teenager mistakes. But we have to be the caring adult. We have to listen. And the more adults there are on this world who want to care for these kids, the more loved they'll feel, the more safe they'll feel, and then the more stable they will become.
Yeah. That's a big job. I don't think you've explained it to me in that way. It just feels like a lot. That is a really big task. Yeah. Especially if we look at what I'm wrestling with is looking at it on a grand scale, right? Looking at the whole of the playing field or whatever. But I guess I am also sensing it's not so hard if you start with one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's how Revision started. Revision started as a soccer group from Charles Ratrammel and a breaking group, also from Charles Ratrammel and Reverend Justin Coleman. And that is how it fostered. With Thursday nights are our community nights. And we have soccer games every single week. And all of a sudden, it has exploded into, we have 25 staff members, 18 of which are former Revision kids. Wow. That shows that the work we're doing is working. Yeah. And I think of those 18, 10 have college degrees. Wow. But all of them have a high school diploma or a GED. That shows Revision is working. Whereas so many other systems are telling these kids no, we get to tell them yes. And one of them walks in every day. A new one will walk in every day. You don't know their story until they tell it to you. And it's an honor for them to trust you with it.
Yeah. I hear the saying right now is like, you've got to earn these kids' respect.
Yes.
You're going to leading young people today. If you're going to interact with young people, whether that's in a director of a resource center, if it's a youth pastor, I mean, I would probably argue as a parent too. I'm not parenting any teenagers, but I would expect it to be the same. Is you've got to earn that respect. The days of an older person has walked into the room, and so they get, they just receive our attention. They just receive, and we listen to everything they say as if it is true and golden and something we have to follow. That goes away, especially when these kids get to their adolescence, when they're discovering for themselves how the world really operates. And I can only imagine how much more it takes to earn the respect of those who have had adults fail them.
Because they have to learn how the world operates when they should be able to be children. 14-year-olds getting kicked out of their homes because stepdad doesn't like them when they should be able to be children. Refugees flying over on planes from Afghanistan, escaping war-torn countries and having marks on their faces from explosions. They didn't get to be kids. They did not get that. And the honor it is for them to open up, and it's hard. Part of it is they see me. I am a 26-year-old white woman who's had nothing but privilege in her life. I went to high school, then I went to undergrad, then I went to grad school. Every car I've owned outside of the car I just purchased was paid for. I have not wanted for anything. And that is the exact opposite story of every child who walks into Revision. So it's okay that they're a little distrusting of me at first. Because being skeptical is a part of their nature because they have not had anyone to trust thus far.
So we as in leadership and I would argue as a Christian, interact with people who are different than us all the time.
Yeah.
Should be. And and while these are some cases that you're experiencing, I'm just continually reminded how much everyone is walking around with a lot of, stories we have no idea about, right? Chaotic family situations, their own marriages, their own homes right now. Like, we don't ever really know what people are dealing with. And so coming from that you said, that place of privilege, and recognizing it's understandable that there's not immediate trust. What do you do to begin to earn that trust from people who have had a different life than you?
At Revision, it starts with a fist bump, or a dab, as they call it.
Okay.
Ready? Starts with a dab.
Okay. So not cool.
That's what it starts with.
Yeah.
And it starts with just asking questions, not in a way that is not in a way that is assuming of their history, of what's going on, of their life, but just asking questions. I think when we have this air about us that's egotistical, that we know better than everyone else, that is when we're shutting people out. I quote one of my favorite musicians, Kendrick Lamar, who says, "Sit down, be humble," often. Because I have to be humble at revision. I can't just walk in there and assume what I think is best. And I think that's what, whenever we walk into situations where we're dealing with vulnerable human beings, we want to assume we know best for them. Because obviously we've done the work. We've figured life out thus far, right? That's not true.
Yeah, have you?
Exactly.
Can you share your notes?
And we haven't, we might not have figured it out. And we get to sit down and have a conversation with these people in a way that's honoring of them. But you can't walk in with this idea of judgment. You can't approach the homeless person on the corner with an idea of judgment. You can't approach refugees and immigrants with judgment. The people who are learning English and becoming emergent bilinguals, instead of judging them for not knowing English, maybe say, "Oh, how cool is it that they are able to learn 2 languages and we weren't?" Right? It starts with being so humble as to say, "I can't fix your situation. I can't fix where I came from, but we are now in communion together." And so, and also part of it is, and I'll talk about this a lot, is who looks like Jesus in those rooms. The Jesus I know was the Jesus who had a hit on his life at age 2. I heard that from a pastor this week. Had a hit on his life at age 2. He was a refugee, he was poor, and he was a brown man. That was Jesus. And who were the onlookers? The rich people, the people with power. The onlookers from the moment he had a hit on his life, even to the moment of his death and resurrection. I walk into revision and I see Jesus. I see Jesus in all of those kids who are going to call me out, who are going to hold me accountable. And yes, they're going to be sinners like the rest of us and be a little aggressive like teenagers are. But for the most important thing, I go to the prisons, I see Jesus in every single person because that's who they are. Yeah. That is who is embodied in their actions and in their spirit.
Yeah. When you talked about not fixing the system and even thinking about how do we build relationships with those who are not like us, it was reminding me of one of my very first seminary classes, my first semester, was evangelism, and the professor talked about being a missionary in, I want to say like Laos or another Asian country, and he talked about how when you want to evangelize, when you want to share the gospel, you have to be willing to be changed.
Yes.
Just as much as you're hoping this person who doesn't know about Jesus might be changed. And that made me think about how when you are working with these children and you're wanting them to see life differently, how much you must have to be willing.
That is so true.
To see life differently.
I think that goes with you get people who come in and they want to volunteer, but when they volunteer, they just want to fix. They see, well, child doesn't have shoes, let me give them shoes. Child can't do this, let me do this. Let me fix this situation for them. That's not what they need. And rather, if you are feeling that, if you feel like you need to fix someone's situation, any situation, person, or condition, then maybe that's a sign that you need to be humbled. Maybe that's a sign that you need to be looking for Jesus in those spaces because God is already there. You can't change the DNA of revision. That was one of my first things. I was like, okay, we're going to go in there. We're going to have homework hour. We're going to do all these things correctly. And all these kids are going to be astute. And I abandoned homework hours so quickly, so quickly as an idea.
Yeah.
And then I said,
Yeah.
how do I become transformed by this place?
I love it. So talk to me about that. How do you see your leadership growing in this setting?
I think my leadership has grown a lot in that I did not realize how much of an advocate I would need to be for people in order to be a good pastor. I've grown in not only listening to their stories, but with a willingness and a desire to share the megaphone. Oftentimes as pastors, we hear these stories and we're like, oh, we'll take that into our own sermon and we'll co-opt it for our own truth. But truly I don't need to be preaching these stories. Carlos, our credible messenger who works with 30 plus kids who are in the juvenile probation system, he needs to be telling his story.
Yes.
The kids who I can't name because they're minors, they get to tell their stories if they want to. And instead of co-opting it, what does it mean to grow as a leader? So much to say that I don't have the privilege to tell this story. I have the privilege to say that this is someone I know. And this is someone I know who has been transformed by the work of revision. And let me show you them. Instead of me going to communities and asking them for money, I say, come to community night at 7:30 on Thursdays. Come to a soccer game. Come visit the Holy Chaos. And as a leader, that's hard because that means letting go of fixing, and that means letting go of putting yourself in the center, which is so easy to do as someone in our leadership role, but we don't deserve the center. These kids do. They deserve the attention.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. What would be your one piece of leadership advice? What's one step someone can take if they're hoping to lead young people today as a parent, as a teacher, as a youth volunteer, as someone who has a heart for young people today? What's one leadership step they can take?
Listen without judgment. Don't judge the situation, the person, or the condition that they're in.
Yeah.
Just listen. And it might sound a little crazy, and it might freak you out, and it might make you uncomfortable. But in order to be a good leader, you have to be, especially with vulnerable people, you have to be a good listener first.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Of course.
How can people connect with you or connect with Revision Houston?
You can find us on social media at Houston Revision, on Instagram and on Facebook, and our website is www.houstonrevision.org. You can find me on Facebook. I'm Jordan Czichos, and I will be the only one with my last name. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Jordan Seekus. So you don't have to spell the last name. It's just Jordan Czichos.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here. I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning in. If you have comments or feedback, I'd love to hear from you. So email me directly at sheleadscomments@gmail.com. I'd love to answer those or share those with us on air. Until next time, I'll see you then. Thanks.